The morning Quincy Hargrove walked into her coffee shop, Lena Voss had exactly $3 in her checking account, a broken espresso machine held together with electrical tape, and a 5-year-old daughter who'd just informed her that kindergarten required a $20 field trip fee by Friday. She didn't have time for trouble. She especially didn't have time for the kind of trouble that arrived in a charcoal overcoat, smelling like cedar and cold air, and looked at her small corner cafe on the wrong side of Charleston's historic district like he was calculating what it was worth. "We're not open yet," she said, not looking up from the milk steamer she was trying to coax back to life with a rubber mallet and sheer stubbornness. "Your door was unlocked. That's because the lock is broken." She finally looked up, tall. Late 40s, maybe. The kind of face that had been striking once and had settled into something harder, more permanent, the way marble does after too many years in the weather. Silver at his temples. Eyes the color of a sky, right before a storm decides what it wants to be. She'd seen men like him before, usually right before something went wrong. "I'm not open until 7, she said. "There's a Starbucks 2 blocks east." He pulled out a chair at the nearest table and sat down. Didn't ask. Didn't seem to consider that asking was necessary. "I know who you are, Lena." Her grip tightened on the mallet. "Then you know I charge extra for people who sit without ordering." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "I'll have whatever you recommend." His name was Quincy Hargrove, and she learned the rest of it in pieces over the next 40 minutes, because that was how long it took for him to explain that her late ex-husband had borrowed $400,000 from Hargrove's private equity firm, had spent 18 months making minimum interest payments while funneling the principal into a series of increasingly bad real estate bets, and had then died in a car accident 8 months ago, leaving behind a daughter, a café mortgaged to twice its value, and a debt that had Lena's signature on the guarantee line. She hadn't known about the guarantee. She hadn't known about any of it. She'd been too busy filing for divorce, learning how to run the espresso machine, and figuring out how to raise Piper alone. "You're telling me," she said very carefully, setting down her coffee cup before she did something with it she'd regret, "that I owe your company $400,000, 412 with accrued interest, and you've come here personally at 6:45 in the morning to tell me this." "I've come here personally," Quincy said, "because I have a proposition." She should have said no. Every reasonable, functional, self-preserving part of her knew she should say no. She should have told him to mail whatever paperwork needed mailing, found herself a bankruptcy attorney, and started researching whether she could still keep Piper's school enrollment if she lost the cafe. Instead, she poured herself a second cup of coffee, sat down across from him, and said, "I'm listening." The proposition was this. Hargrove's firm was expanding into Charleston. A boutique hotel, a restaurant concept, a redevelopment of 3 blocks in the historic district that the city council had been trying to approve for a decade. It required someone who knew the neighborhood, knew the people, knew which alderman had a soft spot for local business, and which one needed to feel important before he'd vote yes. It also required, for reasons involving an international investor with very traditional expectations, a wife. Lena stared at him for a long time, long enough that the espresso machine made a sound like it was coughing up a lung in the background. "You want to marry me," she said flatly, "to close a real estate deal. I want to offer you a contract, 12 months. You act as my wife for the duration of the development approval process. You attend events, host dinners, be present when the situation requires it. In exchange, the debt is forgiven, the cafe mortgage is paid off, and you receive a monthly stipend sufficient to cover your operating costs and personal expenses. And Piper," he didn't hesitate, "and Piper, she stays with you, her schooling, her needs, everything as it is now. She's not part of the arrangement. What arrangement does she think is happening? That's for you to decide." Lena looked down at the table. The grain of the wood was familiar to her the way the back of her own hand was familiar, because she'd spent 3 years refinishing every table in this place herself, nights after Piper was asleep, teaching herself to sand and stain because she couldn't afford to hire anyone. This cafe was the only thing she'd ever built on her own terms. And it was going to disappear anyway because her dead ex-husband had been a liar and she'd been too tired and heartbroken to read the fine print. "Why me?" she asked. "You could hire someone." "I could. I've considered it." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "But hired people have their own interests. They make mistakes under pressure. They talk." His eyes came up to meet hers. "You have skin in this, Lena. Your daughter, your business, your home. You'll do this right because you can't afford not to." She wanted to hate him for that. She almost did, because he was right, and being right in a way that left no argument was its own kind of power. "I want it in writing," she said. "Every word, every condition. I want a lawyer to review it before I sign anything. Of course, and I have rules." Something shifted in his expression. Interest, maybe, or respect. She couldn't tell yet. "Name them." "Piper doesn't know this is fake. As far as she's concerned, you're someone I'm dating who became someone I married. Kids her age can't keep secrets, and I won't put that on her." She paused. "You'll have to actually spend time around her. She'll ask questions. She'll want to show you things. You'll have to be present enough that she believes it." He nodded. "Once. I work. The cafe is open 6 days a week, and I run it. I'm not available to host lunches or play hostess on days I'm working, unless we agree in advance." "Agreed. And you don't get to make decisions about my life or my daughter's life without talking to me first. Not about where we live, not about what I wear to your events, not about anything. You consult me. I'm not an accessory." There was a beat of silence. She held his gaze and didn't blink and waited. "Agreed," he said finally, and then quieter, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd already be crying. I ran out of tears about 6 months into my marriage," she said. "Now I just make coffee and solve problems." He almost smiled then. It didn't quite make it all the way, but it came close. "I think this is going to work." She thought it was probably the worst idea she'd ever agreed to. She signed the contract 3 days later, anyway. Quincy Hargrove moved into the second bedroom of her rented house on a Tuesday. He arrived with 2 suitcases and a carry-on, and seemed faintly puzzled by the controlled chaos of a home arranged around a 5-year-old. The drawings taped to the refrigerator at exact eye height for Piper level. The basket of shoes by the door, sorted by whose were whose, with a level of dedication that did not extend to actually putting them away, the way every flat surface had exactly one toy on it, placed there with the confidence of someone who fully intended to return for it. He stood in the middle of the living room with his suitcase and looked around the way a man looks at a map he doesn't know how to read. "Piper gets home at 3:15, Lena said from the kitchen, where she was making dinner. "She already knows you're moving in. I told her you were a friend who needed a place to stay while his apartment was being fixed. And she accepted that? She's 5. She wanted to know if you liked dinosaurs." A pause. "Do you?" He thought about it with more seriousness than the question probably deserved. "I don't have strong feelings either way." "Good answer. Tell her the T-Rex is cool and you'll be fine." Piper came home at 3:18, burst through the front door like every arrival was an emergency, dropped her backpack directly in the center of the hallway where it would be maximum inconvenient, and stopped when she saw Quincy standing in the living room like he wasn't sure of the rules yet. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked at her. Neither of them moved. "Are you the friend?" Piper asked. "I am," he said. "Do you like dinosaurs?" The corner of his mouth moved. "I think the T-Rex is pretty cool." Piper considered this with the gravity of a judge reviewing evidence. Then she picked her backpack back up, walked over to the couch, climbed up and said, "You can sit here if you want." She patted the cushion next to her. "I'll show you my book." Lena watched from the kitchen doorway as Quincy Hargrove, who owned 4 companies and a plane, and apparently the debt on her cafe, sat down on her second-hand couch and let a 5-year-old show him a picture book about prehistoric creatures. She didn't know what to do with that, so she went back to making dinner. The first public event was a dinner at the Palmetto Club, Old Charleston Money and New Charleston Ambition in the same room pretending to like each other. Lena wore a green dress she'd found at a consignment shop and had altered herself because she'd decided early that if she was playing a role, she'd play it on her own terms. Quincy met her at the door. He looked at the dress the way he'd looked at the cafe that first morning, like he was recalibrating something. You look. If you say fine, I'll step on your foot. I was going to say striking. His hand came to the small of her back, light and professional, the way a man touches a woman in public when they've rehearsed this, when it's part of the arrangement. Shall we? She walked into that room with her chin up and her hand in the crook of his arm, and she smiled at strangers and remembered names and found the alderman everyone was nervous about and told him, completely truthfully, that she'd been following the historic district redevelopment proposals for 3 years because it would affect her cafe's foot traffic, and she'd heard good things about his approach to balancing preservation with growth. His face opened up like a window in spring. He talked for 20 minutes. Lena listened with genuine attention because she genuinely found it interesting, and somewhere to her left, she was aware of Quincy watching her with an expression she didn't have a name for yet. In the car on the way home, he said, "How did you know Alderman Trent would respond to that? He grew up 3 blocks from where the development is going. I Googled him." She looked out the window. People want to feel like their history matters. Give them that, and they'll give you almost anything. Silence. Then, where did you learn that? Running a cafe. You'd be surprised how much of small business is just understanding what people actually need versus what they say they need. He didn't respond, but she caught his reflection in the glass, and he was looking at her like she'd said something that required rearranging. She told herself it didn't matter. This was a contract. 12 months. She was already calculating the calendar. 3 months in, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. It was small things, the kind you don't notice until suddenly you've been noticing them for weeks. The way Quincy started making coffee in the morning, not just for himself, but leaving a cup ready for her before she came downstairs. The way he learned Piper's school schedule without being told and started adjusting his own calls accordingly. The way he showed up at the cafe one afternoon, sat at the corner table with his laptop, and worked there for 4 hours without explanation, and when she asked why, he said, "You mentioned the afternoon slump. Thought an extra body might help the place look less empty." He was right. 3 other people came in because they saw someone sitting there and decided it looked like a good place to stop. She didn't know what to do with a man who was right in ways that felt like kindness. The trouble arrived, as trouble usually does, in the form of information she wasn't supposed to have. She was in Quincy's home office looking for the printer ink he'd said was in the top drawer, and she found instead a folder with her name on it. Not unusual. There were contract documents, the legal agreement they'd both signed. She'd have moved on except the top page wasn't the contract. It was a report from a private investigator, dated 8 months ago, 3 months before he'd walked into her cafe. It was thorough. Her address, Piper's school, the cafe's financial records, her ex-husband's debt history, her own employment record before she'd opened the shop. Everything, laid out with the clean efficiency of someone who'd been building a case. He'd known. He'd known everything before he came in that morning. The unlocked door, the broken espresso machine, the $3 in her account. He'd known all of it. He hadn't stumbled onto her. He'd chosen her, deliberately, specifically. And he'd walked in and let her believe she had a choice. Lena sat down on the edge of the chair and stared at the report for a long time. Then she put it back exactly where she'd found it, closed the drawer, and went back downstairs. She made dinner. She helped Piper with a craft project involving an inadvisable amount of glitter. She smiled at the right times. She waited. She was good at waiting now. Marriage, even a fake one, teaches you things. She picked the moment carefully. 2 nights later, after Piper was in bed, when Quincy was in the kitchen with a glass of whiskey reading something on his phone, she sat down across from him and said, "Tell me how you actually found me." He looked up, and she watched him understand, in the space of half a second, exactly what she'd found. He didn't lie. She'd give him that. "I had you investigated," he said. "Before I came to see you, you knew everything. Yes, the broken machine. The $3. Yes, and you still let me think it was coincidence. Let me think I had options." He set down the phone. "You did have options. Everything I offered was real. The contract, the debt forgiveness, that you engineered the situation and then offered me an escape from it and called it a choice. Her voice was level. She'd promised herself level. That's not a choice. That's a trap with a comfortable lining. The silence stretched. He didn't look away from her. You're right, he said. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected deflection, justification, the business logic of it, the argument that the outcome was good, so the method didn't matter. Men like him always had that argument ready. I selected you because you were the best candidate for what I needed. Someone who'd be motivated, credible, intelligent enough to navigate these events without coaching. You fit every criterion. A pause. But I should have told you from the beginning. I didn't because I was afraid you'd say no. I know, so you removed the possibility. Yes. He looked down at the glass. That was wrong. I've known that for a while now. Lena sat back. She wanted to be angrier than she was. She'd spent 2 days cultivating the anger, letting it build into something solid she could use. But there was something about the way he said it, not as damage control, not as a tactic, just as a man acknowledging a thing he'd done and not flinching from it, that made the anger complicated. I need to think, she said. Okay, I'm not leaving tonight. Piper doesn't need that disruption, but I need you to understand that everything between us just changed. I know, he looked at her. I'm sorry, Lena, not because it's expedient to say it, because it's true. She went to bed. She lay awake for a long time in the dark, listening to the house settle around her, the familiar creaks and sighs of a place she'd started, against all logic, to feel at home in. She thought about the girl who'd signed a contract 3 months ago because she had no other options. She thought about the woman who'd walked into the Palmetto Club in a consignment store dress and made a city alderman feel like his childhood memories mattered. She thought about Piper patting the couch cushion next to her and a man in a charcoal overcoat sitting down without hesitation. She thought about the fact that she was angry and also that she wasn't done. The next morning she came downstairs and her coffee was already made. She stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at it for a moment. I have conditions, she said to his back, where he stood at the counter. He turned. Name them, full transparency from here. Anything about this arrangement, about me, about Piper, about what you tell me before I find it myself. Yes, the contract stands, but not because I don't have options, because I'm choosing this. And when I choose to end it, that decision is mine. Agreed. She crossed the kitchen and picked up the coffee. And you're going to tell me why, she said. Not the business reason, the real reason you came looking for specifically me. He was quiet for a moment. You'd been through the kind of loss that breaks most people, and you'd built something anyway, he said. I wanted someone in this who understood what it cost to keep going when you had every reason to stop. She looked at him over the rim of the cup. That's the most honest thing you've said to me. I'm trying to do better. I know, she said. Don't stop. It was another month before she admitted to herself that the shift had already happened, that whatever line existed between the arrangement and something real, she'd crossed it without noticing, the way you cross a state line in the dark and only realize it when the road sign appears in your headlights. She noticed it first in the way she looked for him when something funny happened at the café. The way the good stories collected in her head during the day waiting to be told to someone specific. She noticed it in the way Piper had started calling him Q, a name she'd invented herself, and the way he answered to it without seeming to find it strange. She noticed it the night he came home from a 16-hour day, looking like the world had tried to take a piece of him, and she made him sit down and eat actual food, and he looked at her across the kitchen table like she was something he hadn't expected to find. What? She said. Nothing. He shook his head. You just this. He gestured vaguely at the table, the food, the normalcy of it. I didn't know this was something I was missing. She didn't answer. She cleared the plates. She stood at the sink and reminded herself firmly that this was a contract. 12 months. She had 6 left. But she was already bad at math where he was concerned. The deal closed on a Thursday in November. The development got its approval. The international investor signed, and Quincy called her at 2 in the afternoon to tell her, and she stood in the middle of the cafe between the lunch rush and the afternoon crowd and felt something complicated move through her that she didn't examine too closely. That night he came home with champagne and Piper's favorite pizza, and they sat on the living room floor because the table was covered in a school project about the water cycle, and Piper explained every cloud diagram with the conviction of someone who had discovered weather personally. Later, after Piper was in bed and the champagne was half gone, and the pizza box was a relic on the coffee table, he said, "The contract ends in 6 weeks. I know. I'd like to talk about that." She looked at him. He looked back. He wasn't careful about it, the way he'd been careful in the early months. He just looked at her like she was the thing he was paying attention to. 12 months was always going to be too short, he said. I knew that probably 3 months in. I've been trying to figure out how to say it since. A pause. I don't want this to end because a calendar says it should. Quincy, I know how it started, he said. I know it started wrong. I know I came in with a file on you and offered you something that looked like a choice and wasn't. I'm not asking you to pretend that isn't true. His hands were around his glass and he wasn't looking away, but I'm also not able to pretend that what this became is less than what it is. And I think you know what it is. She did know. She'd known for weeks and had been very disciplined about not examining it. You investigated me, she said. You chose me like a business asset. Yes, and now you're telling me you have feelings. I'm telling you that I do, yes. I'm aware of the irony. She looked at the half-empty champagne glass in her hand. She thought about the investigator's report, the unlocked door, the careful trap of it. She thought about the coffee that was always ready when she came downstairs, about Piper in the T-Rex book, about standing in her kitchen at 11 at night, making him eat a real meal like it was the most natural thing she'd ever done. She thought about what she'd learned in the past year in the unlikely school of this strange and badly begun marriage, that people were capable of starting in the worst possible way and still, if they wanted it enough, finding their way to something better. That you could be chosen for the wrong reasons and still end up chosen truly. That the path mattered, but it wasn't the only thing that mattered. I need you to understand something, she said. Tell me, I'm not the woman in that file anymore. I'm not the woman you came looking for. She held his gaze. This year made me someone different, harder in some ways, clearer in others. And she meant herself, and he knew it. She doesn't take contracts. She makes actual decisions, I know. So if I stay, it's because I'm choosing to. Not because of debt or circumstance or because you've engineered the exit routes. I know that too. She set down her glass. Then yes, she said. I'm choosing to. He was still for a moment. Then he reached across the coffee table and covered her hand with his, not as a gesture from an arrangement, not performance, just a man and a woman who had started wrong and found their way to something true. They didn't say anything else for a while. Outside, the city made its regular sounds. Inside, the water cycle project rustled gently in the draft from the heater, and her daughter slept down the hall, and the cafe was still hers, paid off and standing, and the woman who'd been white-knuckling her way through survival had become, somewhere along the way, someone who got to choose. 6 months later, Piper informed them at breakfast that she would like a brother or a sister, preferably a sister, because she had more experience with girls, and a hamster would also be acceptable as an interim measure. She delivered this with the calm authority of someone who had thought the matter through thoroughly and was now simply communicating her conclusions. Quincy looked at Lena across the table. Lena looked back. She pressed her lips together to keep the laugh from escaping and failed entirely. We'll think about it, Quincy told Piper, with the gravity the situation clearly demanded. The hamster? Or the sibling? Both, Lena said. Definitely both. Piper accepted this with a nod, slid off her chair, and went to get her shoes, already moving on to the next item on her internal agenda. The door to her room closed. Quincy looked at Lena. Something warm and unhurried moved between them. She's not wrong, he said. About the hamster or the sibling? Both, he said. Definitely both. Lena laughed, and it was the kind of laugh she'd almost forgotten she was capable of, full and unguarded and surprised by itself. The kind that only happens when you're not performing anything for anyone. When you're just there, in a kitchen that became a home by accident or intention, or some combination of the two that doesn't really have a name yet. She'd come a long way from $3 and a broken espresso machine. She'd come even further from the woman who sat across a table from a stranger and thought this was probably the worst idea she'd ever agreed to. It was, in some technical sense, still the worst idea she'd ever agreed to. It was also, without question, the best thing that had ever found her. She decided that was okay. Most of the truest things are both at once.